Welcome back to the Watershed Moments podcast. This episode continues our conversation with Dee Dee Harrison, Forest Supervisor for the San Bernardino National Forest. I'm Heather Dyer, CEO and General Manager of San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, but you can call us San Bernardino Valley for short. Over the next few months, we'll be sharing conversations with different partners about their watershed moments. If you haven't listened to part one, we encourage you to go back and hear our conversation on the growing challenges facing California's forests and watersheds. Recorded last fall, just after the Line and Bridge fires, but before the devastating Palisades and Eaton fires, this series highlights the critical work needed to protect our state's natural resources. Our hearts go out to all of those affected by these wildfires. In part two, we dive deeper into the realities of forest management with the San Bernardino National Forest Supervisor, Dee Dee. So let's get started. So tell me about the line fire. In the last couple months, we had a fire. I think it was 44,000 or something like that
It's about
acres.
44,000 acres, yes. So it started we call it a campaign fire. We don't have those too much here in Southern California. Because of all the people we have and all the fire, because of that, we have a lot of firefighter resources and capabilities. We have large fires here, but our hope is we can throw everything we possibly can at them with all these cooperators, with all the air tankers and all the equipment that you mentioned earlier, and we can have them hopefully under control within hopefully no more than 2 weeks. 2 weeks feels too long.
So it started near City Creek
It
and
started so
moved its way
still
up the watershed.
in the city of Highland. So is what a lot of people don't realize sometimes is a lot of fires they don't necessarily start on national forest system lands. But I told you how many acres we are. We're massive, right? So, and I said wild and urban interface. So communities are here, forest is here, right? So we had fires start here in the community right there adjacent to forest. And so for people who are familiar with how fire moves in topography, it moves pretty fast upslope. And so we'll have fire that'll start down in the foothills or down in the valleys. And because we know our topography on this beautiful land of extremes, as soon as it gets to the toe of that slope and gets enough of whatever, it's just going to race up the hill. And that's what happened. And so because of climate change, California, as you know, we've been in a persistent drought for several decades. Our fuel conditions, it's pretty dry. At the
109 degrees, I
it
think,
was
while they were
100, it was
trying
a
to find it.
triple degree day. And it wasn't windy like today. As you know, we have Santa Ana's here, but that doesn't help. These winds that come through here, they dry out. So we call them fuels. So when you hear us talk about hazardous fuels, these dangerous fuels, they're different types of ones. And so what we call these light flashy fuels that catch and just grow. So all these grasses and small bushes and a lot of these non-native plants that we have growing off the sides of roads, those are a tinderbox around here and they take off. And when you have the right time of year, the right time of conditions, like we do in late summer, which is really right. This was at the beginning of our wildfire season. We're in the midst of it right now, which is security people that was just the beginning for us. The right conditions, the right time, that's what's going to happen. And unfortunately, that's happening too much across this forest where my nervousness is that we're going to start losing it 40,000 acre chunks at a time.
Yeah. So you and I have been working on the Headwaters Resilience Partnership, which is a
Yes.
group of different entities, community members, nonprofits, RCD, a couple different water entities, and the National Forest, CAL FIRE, et cetera. And we've been talking about it for, I think, 3 years now. We've been talking about, okay, what does it look like? We've mapped the National Forest, and I think about 80% it was at high risk of wildfire because of the lack of burns in that, let's say, like the last 15 years or something like that, if I remember right. So it's not that we didn't know that this was possible. In fact, we did know that it was highly likely to happen at some point. I was very hopeful that we could get out ahead of it. But because, these things take a really long time to plan, to permit, to get public buy-in, et cetera. The fire did happen. Unfortunately, it did burn, I think, quite a few of the drainages within the Santa Ana River watershed. And I do expect, especially if we have a wet winter, we will have very challenging water quality issues related to the Santa Ana River. I think it burned City Creek, Plunge Creek, Alder Creek, Santa Ana River, maybe part of Mill Creek watershed. So those are essentially the veins and arteries of our watershed that are now at risk of, pretty significant water supply challenges, which is why the water district was involved in the partnership over the years. So we could foresee that this might happen. And we were working and we still are working diligently trying to get some momentum going forward. But can you just talk a little bit about the sense of urgency from your forest management? I know there's a national coalition and effort and a real push on the national level to try to get some money on the ground for fuels management out in front of these fires. Because again, it's not that fire is bad, it's that when it is such an extreme fire, when it has catastrophic damage to the trees, the roots, the soil, the seed bank, that's when it's hard to recover. So, can you just talk a little bit about? I know you've been working like furiously on all of these different initiatives and
Yeah.
getting money to Southern California to try to get out ahead of this problem. And I'm hoping,
Mm.
although it's unfortunate that we had the line fire, I'm hoping maybe at least to draw a little bit of attention to the problem from your national leaders.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up what you did about fire, that not all fire is bad. Fire, it's a coarse one, but it's one of our most valuable restoration tools. So that's why we still use it. That's why it's in our toolbox. And that's why
That's why it's been used for thousands
since
and thousands of
of years,
years.
right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, as I said, low moderate intensity fire, we want to actually
Yeah.
see that on the landscape. We really do. So nationally, as the Forest Service, I said we are a federal agency, so we're national in scope across the country. So it's 100 and something, 120 something national forests. So I'm one of those national forest supervisors. In the agency, we have what we call lower complexity and higher complexity national forests. Southern California, the San Bernardino, it is high. It's right. Well, it is on the high end of high
Mhm.
complexity, right? So I'm a high complexity forest supervisor. So what a lot of people don't know is
That is a fancy title.
right. So I'm a so
I love that.
just a forest supervisors period. So okay, so enough about me. So back to so nationally we have a wildfire crisis on our hands, and it's true. Did I mention those two things? We're getting more fires, they're getting larger, and the fire behavior is getting more erratic,
Mhm.
right? We're seeing it burn up wind, especially in Northern California. We've seen it burn up several communities in a day, even,
Yeah.
right? Fires did not do that even 10 years ago. So it's called, right? We have a national wildfire crisis strategy. And I'm going to quote the chief of our agency, who California was his own backyard for over a decade. So our chief, in an internal address to employees, this is his first all employee address as chief almost 4 years ago. He said to us, we do really great work here, and I don't want to take away from that. And I'm really proud of all the work we do. Um, but we got to stop with these random acts of greatness.
Mm.
They have to make sense in the bigger picture and the large fabric of what we're doing, right? And that got me thinking. And I was thinking about our own Amazon, right? And the need for us to significantly increase pace and scale of our restoration efforts and to do it in a way that makes sense, not just to me, but to us collectively, because we all have a lot of values at risk, right? That's the whole point of the Headwaters Resiliency Partnership, for us to come to collectively around our set of values that are important to us. If we don't do something different, we're going to lose it all. And even though these are not commercial timber forests, so as we talk about things that we can be doing different in Southern California, economics looks like something different here. So why
Mhm.
aren't we tapping that and figuring out what is the economic value? We figured out some of the ecotourism here. We aren't fully capitalizing on that, but we can make the dollars make sense for us to reduce that hazardous fuel loading, reduce some of these trees and do something valuable with that material and keep the economics flowing through here, right, in our mountains. So going back to the wildfire crisis, so that is a national engagement, but it's more of a Western United States investment. So as a part of that, our agency established 21 landscapes over 2 years. Southern California forests, there are four of them. So it's the San Bernardino. You're out of San Bernardino, right? Centralized out of San Bernardino, California. There's the Cleveland where you
Mhm.
used to work. where their central office is San Diego, the Angeles National Forest, which is over in Arcadia, California, and then the Los Padres, which is their central office is out of Solvang. So the four Southern California forests, so together we're about almost 2.4 million acres in national forests. We're not contiguous. Some of us touch the Angeles and the San Bernardino touch across the San Bernardino and the San Gabriel Mountains. But we're all aligned in the fact that collectively these are our Amazon, but the vast bulk of it is in our mountains. So,
well, and just think about the economic engine behind the region that those forests serve. Tremendous, right? San Diego, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, one of the fastest growing areas of our country. It's just amazing if you think about those four forests,
right, and then
and where they sit.
Right, and so the San Bernardino National Forest sits across both San Bernardino and Riverside counties. Those are the two largest counties in all of the United States. And then so we talk a lot about ecotourism, impacts to recreation. So let's really talk about some of the other things when we're talking about when we say true economic impacts that people don't realize. When we have catastrophic wildfire, let's talk about I-15. Everybody knows about the Cojon Pass. And you're right, everybody drives to Vegas, right? So when we have fire in that pass, if we have to shut down even one side of that highway, that's a direct call to the White House.
My husband was in that fire that was on Cajon Pass where they had to get people out and hike up the hill. That was wild. Never thought I would see something like
So when
that.
people think about, so if you look on either side of that freeway, first of all, how many lanes that is of essentially 18-wheelers and commerce going up and down that highway, the economics between LA, Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, and the city of Las Vegas, all the rail that's on the side of that right? All that major rail that goes to there again, economics. If anybody pays attention running through this forest, these high-powered KV lines, right? We're taking power from Vegas to LA to San Diego. That's all coming through the San Bernardino National Forest. Your cell phone turns on across all these mountain peaks, these comp sites, your cell phones, those dishes and those satellites that are up there, those are keeping us all in business. That's coming through the San Bernardino National Forest. That's another reason we can't have catastrophic wildfire coming through and burning this place down.
So your forest chief said we cannot have these
random acts of greatness. So what that means is, and so we were really good about this here in the San Bernardino National Forest. And I don't mean to talk about myself, and I'm definitely not talking about my partners, excellent partners. When we have these discrete projects, important work that needs to be done, we find ways to go about it. But sometimes we do a really important project here, then we go over and do a really important project way over here. Well, what about all that stuff that needed to happen in between? What about the connectivity that needs to happen? And so that's what I'm talking about is a whole big old forest that we've got to do some work in. Doesn't mean we have to treat all those acres, but are we treating all those critical places, those anchor points? Where did I mention? All those values at risk coalesce, the calm sites, the trees, the habitat, the recreational opportunities, the water infrastructure. When I hear you talking about winter is coming and what we're going to see for sedimentation that's going to come down and that's going to clog the catch basins and pipes and back up things at our dams. All of that is a part of it, the hydrology that runs through here, hydroelectric power, right? Southern California Edison, Verizon, Frontier, they all have big time assets, right? On our national forest. And so the reason that we have to come together, so this all comes back to treating trees, our ability to treat those trees, reduce our fuel loading. So a lot of people don't realize this. National forests were truly created on the premise that when I said watershed, reaping watershed health and benefits, multiple use, multiple benefits. Our ability to treat those trees shores up all those things that are not only important to me, but those things that are also important to other people. They're also important to you all, not also economically, because I know I talked a lot about it, but socially, what this represents for us and even what it represents for us politically here. This is part of our political capital, having these beautiful forests here. So the ability to go in and do natural resource management to treat forests reverberates hundreds of miles beyond that acre being treated. And so when I say randomly, Why we've got to stop doing that, because we've talked about it. That footprint that we've been trying to treat where we had that lime fire, we've done some good work around it. We talked about meadow treatment. Bluff Mesa is one of those success stories in this, right? Because of the restoration work that we did around that meadow encroachment, that was a place that had water. There was a place where we had reduced trees and did clearing that helped us hold that fire and keep it from getting into the city of Big Bear, right? That's why it's so important. So for my central mission, right, taking care of the land, but also taking care of people, to have healthy forests that look like what they were supposed to look like 100 years ago. And we talk about all the importance for that, but for all those other reasons. So for us essentially to go out and do mechanical and prescribed fire treatments on our forests. So the mechanical treatments, which means we go out there with equipment and harvesters.
I'm going to just ask you a question that most people probably wonder.
Okay.
What do you do with the tree material once you cut it down for a treatment?
So, Southern California, we have a little thing called a supply versus demand problem. We got a lot of supply and not a demand. And so when we talk about our Headwaters Resiliency Partnership, that's one of those things that we're going to have to wrap our heads around together as a group to figure out what we're going to do with all the material, because we do not have a commercial timber industry here. We do not have timber mills where this material comes off of here and it goes straight somewhere else and it is produced and manufactured into some other product. That doesn't happen here the same way it does in other parts of the state and other parts of the West, frankly, other parts of this country.
Because we don't have the right species to make products, or because there's just not a market
There's not a
for
market for it.
something.
So we don't have the infrastructure that we used to have. Because of the work that we want to do, our forests, right? We mentioned they aren't that small, they aren't that big, but they do need to be able to be on some type of maintenance cycle. But it may not be enough of treatment of material to come off for someone to say, I'm going to invest in having a $10 million right timber mill here, right?
Got it.
Because 10 years from now, I might not have enough material to sustain it, because even though 10 years from now, we'll still be removing fuel and cutting trees off a national forest, it's not going to be in the sheer volume that it needs to be now, right? So remember, it all comes back to economics. So maybe there are things I talk about. Northern California, they're doing a project where they're cutting trees and they're shipping them out by rail, right? I know of a project in northern Utah where they face some of our similar problems of having a lot of small, low value material, because that's what we have here, and what to do with it. So we're figuring out how to source it locally. So within 100 miles of that forest, if it's a poultry plant that feed those chicken are bedding down on, that material, that's from trees off of that forest, right? You're rolling up to the Home Depot and you're getting a bag of mulch, where that mulch is coming off those forests. Someone's making ornamental reefs and boughs off needle casts and limbs from trees, right? That's coming off your national forest when you're buying that Christmas tree every year, that fresh wreath that's on your door. I think that's the next frontier from us, is because I don't even think we've got to be creative. I think that we've just got to stop thinking inside of a box that's not ours and thinking inside of the box that is.
I think that's what some people might not, it's hard to put that together, and that the Forest Service cannot do this alone, right? Like you can do your part, but then we need like an army of entrepreneurs who are going to come up with ideas on what to do with this material. And it becomes a beneficial relationship that is not existing right now. Like that is the key that we need to try to figure out the solution for.
Like, could you imagine a world when we're talking about trying to achieve all these things, what we call this three-legged ecological stool, and I kind of referenced them, social, political, and economic, when it comes to our natural resource management? Can you imagine a world where we've done this work, where we can have healthy fire in the landscape because we remove trees? Because we've done that, we've shored up our infrastructure to make it resilient against catastrophic fire and catastrophic flood and mudslides. Then that same material coming off our national forests is going towards addressing our housing challenges, and it's building low income housing, right? Because it's material coming out of our own backyards. Can you imagine how much affordable that makes to build houses when the material is coming there? And so we have so many opportunities to be reaped. I don't know how we can do it. Did I mention I've got the supply? I can't wait for
To
people
all
and
the
their
entrepreneurs
ideas for
out
the
there,
demands. Yes.
what can you do with some wood products that are
Right.
not gigantic trees?
Right. And one of the things, the cool things about the Forest Service is while we also depend on partners for sometimes for money, but other resources, people's times. I've relied on San
Mhm.
Bernardino Valley Water District in recent history, speaking on the line fire for science and expertise,
Yeah.
right? That I don't have. So the beautiful thing about that partnership is we get to bring all those things to the fore to kind of hopefully figure those things out together. And that's why we stood that up. And that's why it's so important that we breathe life into that because no one entity can figure it out on their own because we all have a piece of the problem, which means we probably all have a piece of the solution.
Right. So now we have a strategic plan. I was
Right.
going to
It's in
say, so
development.
your chief, he should say instead of random acts of greatness, we need strategic acts of greatness from not just the Forest Service, but the forest and all of your surrounding partners is really what the goal is, right?
So as a partnership, you said it, we've mapped this forest using fancy
Mm-hmm.
technology. Anyone who's familiar
Beautiful maps.
with LiDAR, right? It's from right. We do
Yeah.
sensing and it's cool how we do it. But where we've essentially mapped the forest, so map the forest structure, so the stands and the
Mhm.
species that are there, and we've done it for so this forest covers San Bernardino Mountains and some of the Santa Rosa, or the bulk of the San Bernardino Mountains. And so remember, so we're talking about we no longer have to do random acts of greatness, but it doesn't mean that us to be strategic, we have to treat 838,000
Right.
acres. That's not being strategic either. So we mapped the forest. We figured out, so together as a partnership, we went through something called the Southern Montane Conservation Strategy. We
Hmm.
pilot that together where we brought the things that matter to us. We mapped those along as we mapped those forests, right? So we mapped all our resources, our natural resources and our other investments together so we can prioritize what we needed to protect. So then we could prioritize where we needed to treat. So as partners across our inland empire right now, we're working on a shared, literally. So when you hear strategic plan, it's an annual treatment plan of where we're going to go on the landscape and then figuring out the funds that we need to attach to it. Then also the people and some of these other demand problems so that we can actually get her done.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm excited for. And that's what's getting us out of being even random as partners because we've done great work together. But does it make sense in the grand scheme of things? Or have we unintentionally been leaving holes in our fabric, like the line fire, that now we have the opportunity to go and shore up? And even though I know it's scary for people, even in the midst of the line fire, I've heard people say, I hope you guys aren't going to cut any more trees. We've lost so many. We do have to cut trees. But then remember, the balance, striking that balance is so important. We're going to have a lot of
Mhm.
reforestation
Yeah.
work that we're going to have ahead of us because we still want to put trees back on that landscape because we need them to stabilize that hillside because we're going to have a little bit of a sedimentation
Yeah,
problem.
correct. I am a little bit worried about the upcoming winter, more than a little bit actually, just because I know that on some of the other fires in Southern California, as soon as that rain hits, the hillside just starts sliding, and then the waterway is clogged, and behind the dam will be, not great water quality. So we have a few years of recovery and so, what do you think that recovery really looks like? What can we do to work together to kind of get out ahead of maybe some of the larger risks? And there's a lot we can't do, but there are some things that we can do. So, what is your vision on that?
So we started something. So there's some things that we do right in the aftermath of a fire. And so, and ironically, because I'm looking at a picture of a bear on your wall, the acronym is BEAR, but it stands for Burn Area Emergency Response. So essentially, it's that emergency stabilization that needs to happen just for those things that you talked about, where we are so nervous about those hillsides being sloughed off because they don't have the vegetation that's holding that
And
soil in
thank you for
place.
letting us be part of that team. We really
Yes.
appreciate
So
it.
that was also, so I am going to brag on the partnership a little bit. I said I wasn't going to do that too much, but I am and tout that. That was something that was also novel and new during an interagency emergency stabilization response. That was the first time we did that ever together as partners.
Yeah. I'm not even sure it's normally done. I just called you and said, hey, I'd really like to be part of this because we're very concerned about our water supply.
And I was like, I got the thing for you. Let's do it. And we did it. I think there's probably other things we should do later, like the
Yes,
cement. But
exactly.
we both said yes, that was enough for her, right? And that was the great thing that you can
We were
do
doing adaptive management during
man,
a crisis situation.
during a crisis situation. So we actually have an emergency plan, right? So here's where it started. So for some of those stabilization efforts, so there's a lot of things that get created on the landscape when
Mhm.
you're trying to put out a fire that's a part of the suppression efforts that I would say exacerbate the problem out on the landscape. So a lot of
Such
those
as,
are line
mhm.
and hand line. So going in and simply in places, shoring that up with water bars where it needs to be, right? And then even some of the existing road network that was out there were places where we significantly widen up those roads. So some of that to bringing it back in, some of that shoring up some of those places where we did damage, some around some of those riparian areas, so stabilizing some of those stream banks. There are places where we can't do it now, but you make plans for the spring where we actually need to go in and do some reseeding.
Mhm.
So we make plans for that work. Um, so all the things that you can think of related to the things that you need to do in response to hanging on to soil and hillsides is the work that we do under bear and make the plan for all that. Some of that also is just science, right? It's safety. So hazard trees, removal of hazard trees is a big piece of that. But then signing areas that aren't safe. So we came together and we did that as partners, but then there was also additional science that went into that. It's the modeling.
Mhm.
So we talked about here's all the things that we have to do to just try to hold the ground together between now and just to get through winter, right? That's what that stabilization is. But then it's the modeling and the long-term restoration and recovery. So we were able to come together to use our science and your science, but especially on things that aren't our wheelhouse. And when we talk about when winter is coming, to understand not only where we're going to see the debris flows, but the impacts and the potential of that. So when you talk about all those creeks and how our watershed got blown out, how that is mapped so we can tell people where it's going to hit you the hardest, or at least people can have enough of information at their fingertips to say, hey, before this first winter event happens, let me go purchase flood insurance, or here are the resources at hand for me between, and we did this collectively as partners, right? With emergency services or with FEMA. So that's part of it. But then let's go back to the science. It is the modeling and all the work that's got to happen in the next couple of years. So we're going to have some significant hydrological impacts. There's already impairment. And if I'm being too fancy, maybe plain speak, because I know not everybody is a science nerd and a geek like I am who's going to tune in. Um, but they already have a compounding problem because a couple of years ago, we had the Apple fire that
Mhm.
already impacted the Santa Ana watershed. And then a couple of years, right? So in 29, right? So we had that. We had a big time winter event that came through in 2019 that saw a lot of flooding, a lot of repair. And then last year we had Tropical Storm Hillary.
Yeah.
And so all the debris from that Apple fire, so massive logs came out and they've already clogged the Santa Ana, already blocked, right? All that stuff that has to be removed. This is going to be on top of that. So here's what's scary for me, Heather. I know it's going to be bad. I don't know exactly what it looks like. That's why I'm even going to be dependent on you and others in the partnership because I think it's going to be pretty unprecedented. And what I can say is because we are now a partnership, we are showing up as different ways as partners. I hope for whatever happens this winter, because we've decided that we're no longer going to have these random acts of greatness. So even though the line fire happened, we're going to be out there implementing the North Big Bear project.
Yes.
We're also going to be doing novel things like conservation finance together. So finding new ways to finance natural resource management and reap ecological benefits off of that, like water is a right. It's a product of that. More water, cleaner water is a part of that. Is because of how we're partnered and how well we are posturing ourselves as partners. Now that we're actually going to have a plan in our pocket, my hope is we'll be able to prevent the next line fire. But even if we have something that's close, we'll know how to respond as partners. Because when it does come to catastrophic events, it's not if, it is when, and knowing that all our work is to mitigate, that it will never be eliminate, because our backyard is still our backyard. It is our crazy fire adapted ecosystem that is the San Bernardino Mountains.
Yeah, especially in the
And the
time of
Santa Ana River
yeah.
watershed.
In times of climate change, it really is going to take us all sitting around the same table, working on the same big puzzle and figuring out, well, what piece can I put down? Because no one agency, no one person, no one department of even the federal government can do it all. It really is going to take lots and lots of different entities who can be part of the solution. Because everything is just moving at such a fast pace and changing so rapidly that for us to get out ahead of it will be, just a monumental effort. But then once we're there, we're not done. That's really just kind of the starting line, right? So
it's got to be ongoing.
yeah, it's a huge challenge, and you have got such a gigantic job. Um, I hope that everyone listening, really understands that being a forest supervisor in Southern California, it's a lot of different things. You wear a lot of different hats, and you are keeping a lot of things going at all times. But fundamentally, I think one thing I just want to end on is you're leading an agency, a forest of people that are committed professionals to this very important job. And so we've talked a lot about forest resilience and ecosystem resilience, but I'm really committed to having organizational resilience as well. And I think in your job, it's maybe similar to how I think about it. Like, I hold this job for right now. I am a steward of this agency for right now, and there will be people that come after me. And so, my goal is to keep it in as, good shape as possible. Your job is similar, right? You're not going to be the last forest supervisor of the San Bernardino National Forest. So just talk a little bit about, man, your people have such a hard job and not a lot of resources. And every year, forest or fire season starts earlier. And then when they're out there, it's this tremendous risk that you must be, I don't know how you sleep at night when there's an active fire going on.
Not well.
So, how do you maintain and promote the resilience of your staff, your firefighting staff? Certainly, we could have a whole different podcast on wildland firefighters and their personal resilience, but like, what steps do you take to try to maintain that, positivity and commitment to the charge that you have, and just the health and well-being of all of the people on the San Bernardino? Because I know a lot of them and they're fantastic, and they always have a smile, and they're always proactive, and they always want to be part of a solution. How do you maintain that in such a challenging time?
I was gonna say, their jobs are pretty tough right now. And I'll be candid, right? We're challenged with staffing. If anyone who's read the LA Times, they know this. It's no secret. Agencies go through ebbs and flows. But yeah, let me talk about the resilient, wonderful human beings that work on the San Bernardino National Forest. It's not me. When I say it's really all of us together that we take work environment pretty seriously. It's because I happen to belong to an agency, and I know you know this very well. We've talked about this from your time at the Forest Service. One of the reasons we all work there is right, because you vote with your feet. It is really a family agency, right? It's super familial, right? We know each other's kids, grandparents' names, might know what you had for dinner last night and the night before that. So that's part of it, that we really just care for each other, right? Mm-hmm. Because especially with the things that we deal with, like fire, they go through some pretty tough things together. They see some pretty tough things together, and that forges, right? That forges a bond like none other, right? That's for sure when you go through some of those things together. And then the other thing is they're all members of this community, right? I am not originally from Southern California. Most of my employees are right here. So when it's your backyard and your family and your neighbors, it's a personal commitment. And then the force and the agency has a set of value systems that are really important to us. And one of the things that makes it easier for us to come to work every day is that we have an agency set of values that aligns with our personal ones about how we treat people every day, right? That sure, we're purpose driven, results oriented. And we also just understand that we're just people coming to work every day, just trying to do a good job and putting one foot in front of the other. And so we just want to be good bosses, good neighbors, and good friends. That's all we strive to do and try to keep it pretty simple. Because other than that, you'll lose your mind because this is Southern California. We all feel that in our day jobs and at home. And so I'm really thankful that I just have really grounded, wonderful, passionate people who just want to take care of their home and their friends.
Let me ask you one more question. So again, this podcast is called Watershed Moments, which can be, a turning point, a thing that happens, a moment in your life or in your career or in this watershed that really changes things. And they happen, when you don't even expect it. So, what has been a watershed moment in your career?
So this might sound dorky. This job is it. So I've worked for a combination of the Forest Service and USDA for over 20 years. You said it. I'm not going to repeat it. It's been a minute. And, you work in a lot of rural communities where the Forest Service can be the biggest employer or you're right. Right. Everybody's coming to you for something. And it's really right. And that's a wonderful thing to be positioned that way. And then there's something at first really humbling about coming to Southern California where you realize that right, and you need other people just as much as they need you, and maybe then some. And then kind of liking it and being okay with it because then you get to do things a little bit different and a true spirit of partnership and network and engagement that it kind of forces you to do to kind of get out of your silo. And so here's what Southern California has forced my hand professionally and personally is to get out of my box, the things that scare me, people and situations, because in order to be successful, just to even have a good day, you need that person next to you. And so here's my watershed moment for this Santa Ana watershed and all those things that I need to do so my people can still come to work and have smile on their faces, or we can still feel like we're making meaningful contributions. In order for it to make all this happen, I do need the Headwaters Resiliency Partnership. I do need all those other agencies. I need people in the communities. I need social license and capital for us to be able to treat. But simply put, I recognize this. I in my career, I've done a lot of things on my own. But in order to make it around here and for us to achieve our collective goals, but in order for me to even achieve my personal goals, I can get some things done and I can get them done rather quickly. I can easily by myself. But to start with these random acts of greatness and actually go far, I'm going to have to go together. I'm okay with that.
Thank you so much, Dee Dee. I will concur that a watershed moment for us, I've been working in this watershed for 14 years, was when you came to work as the forest supervisor. You are a breath of fresh air. You can get bogged down in the bureaucracy of the USDA at times. I'm not going to lie. The Forest Service really likes to do things certain ways. But when you came here, I just felt this amazing sense of like hope and energy and an ignition of the will and the steadfast grit to get this done. And thank you so much for being the first guest on our podcast. It is such a joy to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm so honored, Heather, that you would have me of all people be your first guest. So thank you for that.
Well, I can't wait to keep trying to change the world together. So thanks, Dee Dee.
Ditto.
That concludes our two-part series with Dee Dee Harrison on the topics of forest management and water resilience. Thank you for joining us for these important discussions on protecting California's forests and watersheds. Through collaboration and innovation, we can build a more resilient future. This discussion was a great reminder to me that really hard does not equal impossible, especially when we work together. If you like what you heard today, be sure to like, follow, and share with a friend. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and thank you for being part of our watershed moments.